Welcome to the American Cheese Revolution. It's an artisan revival of our dairy heritage you probably didn't even realize was happening. It really has been going on ever since in 1916, our dairy heritage started to be taken from us with the first patent for processed cheese coming out. So who am I to make such a claim? I'm a cheesemonger. Cheesemonger's more than a funny sounding title or a job that involves eating cheese all day, but I never let that keep me away from my half pound a day. A cheesemonger is a craft that goes back to the 1500s. It's a union of tastemakers who put only their stamp of approval on dairy products of the highest quality. So we're going to start passing out some cheese trays. Everybody be patient. Everybody will get one. There's more than enough. And try not to rush ahead. I'm going to talk about each cheese on the cheese tray and prompt you to eat them, okay? So yeah, just help out passing them out and such. In order to know where we're going with the cheese industry, it's important we understand where we've been. See, cheese is one of those really early foodstuffs associated with civilization. Similar to cereal grains and the invention of beer and bread, cheese allows us to stop wandering and set up communities. So the first cheeses are feta-like or ricotta-like cheeses. But then as we get towards the Middle Ages and the rise of a monastic movement, as well as large stately manors, a time is ushered in that author Paul Kinstedt refers to as the age of cheese diversification. So during this time, cheese starts to tell you a lot about a person, a community, where they're coming from. So let's take, for instance, traditional cheddar. If I tell someone I'm a traditional cheddar maker, I'm saying quite a bit about myself. First, I work within or live within Somerset County, within the United Kingdom, right by Cheddar Gorge. In terms of resources, I have access to salt. Through much of history, it'd be a thing worth noting. See, as I hand salt my curd as opposed to making a brine salted cheese, means I'm using my salt fairly inefficiently, actually, so I have access. I have cows, as they're the more predominant dairy animal in the region as opposed to sheep or goat. And lastly, you know something about how my cheese is made. See, cheddar isn't just a cheese, nor is it just a geography, it's an actual process, right? So to understand cheddaring, let's first just do a little basic talk about cheese making, right? We all have seen a cup of yogurt. That solid mass in the middle is a curd. The liquid around it is whey. As I cut the curd, more whey is expelled. So that's basic cheese making, right? For cheddar, once you have fairly dry curds, you feed it into a mill. You cut it into pieces that are about the size of a fingernail. That's when you would hand salt it. And then you start stacking the cheese. You stack these curds. Eventually, they knit together enough that you can put it into a hoop or a brick. And that's why cheddar, as it ages, you get this really crumbly texture. We've designed it that way. And this relationship between cheese and resources is not unique to cheddar. You have countless examples. You have the Ossau-Arati in the Pyrenees, the Loire Boucherons, you have the Gruyères of the Swiss Alps. The Swiss Alp Gruyere is another really good example of this reflection of resources and people. It's the solution to a problem. At the top of the mountain in the height of summer, I have access to all this lush grass, an abundance of really high quality milk. But I know in the dead of winter, I'm going to have very little feed for the cows, let alone the community, and we're going to have really terrible weather, so we're going to be at the bottom of our valley. So how do I solve this without killing a cow in the middle of winter? Make a really big cheese. So Gruyere is an 80-pound wheel. It's going to survive any inclement weather, and it's going to feed the entire community. In fact, it sustains the community. The Gruyere is an example of a village cooperative system. Somebody's responsible for the herd, somebody's responsible for making the cheese, there's an entire profession devoted to aging the cheese, and then other people are selling and importing the cheese. A whole village is sustained on one product. And this relationship continues to this day and has been going on for a millennia. But where did it all kind of start to fall apart? Some might say the Dutch. The Dutch did a really good job of making a global cheese market very quickly. Have you ever noticed how Goudas are those perfect round shapes always? Well, they fit great in a barrel for overseas journeys, well protected. So quickly, you have a growth market, and the Dutch are cornering it. So with that talk about the global commodity market, we're going to take a moment and go start with our cheese tray. So everybody should have a cheese tray by now, right? All right, make sure there's processed sliced cheese is your 12 o'clock. All right, and we're going to start with that cheese. And while you're eating the sliced processed cheese, think about flavor, think about texture, think about milk, right? That's where it starts from. See if you can think about milk while you're eating this cheese. So with that, our cheese story is going to start to join up with the Americas, right? So as the Dutch have this international cheese market growing, and it's happening all around Europe, Pecorinos, Cheddars, Goudas, Gruyères, they're shipped all around the world. Everybody's enjoying them. The New World starts to become a pivotal part for this. The New England colonies are exporting more cheddar to the UK than is being made at home at that point, right? And cheeses from all sorts of different geographic traditions are made in the New World. What happens with any strong growth market that starts to grow from this? Well, you get fraud, you get deceit, poorly made products, a race towards profits. Cheese is no exception to that rule. So how do we even get orange cheese, right? That's not natural. So cheeses of a really deep yellowish hue are coming from the butter fat of the cheese, in cow's milk at least. See, cows carry carotene through the grass, through their fat, into the final cheese product. Well, around this time of growth, cheesemongers and cheesemakers realized they could sell even more dairy products to the market. So they start skimming their milk to get butter, thus removing the fat as well as the color from their cheese. As the market begins to grow and get wise to this, cheeses of a duller nature sell less. Whether or not that's due to skimming for fat or due to pasture variations to seasonality, these cheeses of duller color aren't doing well. So cheesemakers start using a natto seed, otherwise known as the achiote seed, to get a uniform color of orange in their cheese. No longer can the market tell what season my cheese is made, whether or not I skimmed my cheese to begin, or my milk before I made it into cheese. Hell, they can't even tell if the cows are eating grass at this point. So that love of orange cheese carries over our beloved American cheese with our close ties to the British dairy world. See, America's cheese culture, similar to the whole story of America, builds from our immigrant groups, right? Predominantly it's British in the beginning, but it has strong ties from Swiss, Italian, German, to a lesser degree French, Greek. They all start to play a role in this. So as cheese and the industry grows, you see a race towards profits, towards control. That's the only way we can finally get this mechanization that we need. So as cheese ushered in civilization, and then it ushered in globalization, you now have cheese being on the forefront of industrialization, right? For industrialization, it's always a matter of control. Cheese being a product of Mother Nature is always at odds with control. But around the 1900s and the beginning of them, you start to get some major technological advances. From refrigeration to transportation, and lastly, pasteurization, we're able to get a really uniform product from milk. But what happens when you start getting a uniform product from milk? Well, you take away its fingerprints. You've taken away its soul. I don't know if the cows were Holstein, were they Guernsey, were they Jersey, brown Swiss, were they eating at the top of a hill, low in a valley, or once again, were they even eating grass to begin with? In the early 1900s, this patent for processed cheese comes out. And so what James L. Kraft has discovered is a way to take cheese, cook it down with sodium citrate, extend its shelf life, change the textures, and make it much more pliable. So let's look at American cheese that same way we just looked at cheddar cheese. It certainly tells us something of geography. It comes from America, kind of a large place. Might cover any possible margin for error there is with our industrial pooling system. It certainly tells a story of resources. It tells a story of abundance, a growing market, a need for efficiencies and mechanizations, right? And it definitely tells us something about process. But the process it tells us of that final cheese product. We know very little about the cheese that goes into American cheese. This idea of cheese and identity are now really separated. I would say that this is the cheese culture most of us have grown up in. Cheeses, even those with really exotic names, feel like there's no connection between people and place. Hell, Parmigiano Reggiano, the king of cheese, and one of our oldest cheeses, comes to us in the grocery market. It's either shredded, it's flaked, or it's snow globe, depending on our preference. But that's until the revolution really begins. So unlike the American Revolution, the American cheese revolution contains no one shot heard around the world. It's instead a series of cheesemakers and cheesemongers arriving at the same conclusion: the market needs better cheese. So with that, you should locate at around your 6 o'clock a cup of fresh goat cheese, right? It's from Laura Chanel goat cheese. It's just called Chef Chev. It's their freshest product. Go ahead and take a shot. Everybody, please try it. I know goat cheese can be a polarizing flavor, but you should taste milk, you should taste goat, you should know that it is goat cheese. So around the late 60s, early 70s, you have a generation of female goat cheese makers finding their voice at the same time. From Redwood Hill Farms to Laura Chanel, all the way to Vermont Creamery, Marin Sonoma, all the way to Vermont, a movement's really starting. Around that same time, cheesemakers who have been on the sideline this whole time with truly unique cheeses that did tell a story of people and places, they learned to differentiate their products in a growing market. Words like artisan start being thrown around a lot. A great example is the Vella family. So the Vella family, and is also going to be your cheese at 3 o'clock, should be cubed. It's going to be like the straightest cube. The other one's a little more irregular. The Vella family has been making cheese since the 1930s in Northern California. Like many of the Italian immigrants in the area, they made a dry jack cheese. Now, dry jack is a variation of the local Monterey Jack. And during World War II, as we couldn't get Parmesan in this country due to Italian embargoes, this cheese had been refined and elevated to being a Parmesan substitute. It's one of America's first original recipes. In 1969, Tom and his son Ignacio Ig Vella moved the center of operation down to wine country in Sonoma. And they start using this word artisan. The cheese quickly becomes iconic in the region and part of this growing movement. So where are we now with cheese? I feel like we're in our last iteration of the cheese revolution. I believe it got started really and became official in 1983 when the American Cheese Society was formed. And in the late 80s or early 80s, you start getting cheesemongers joining the forces. So you have Steve Jenkins, who authors a book called The Cheese Primer, still handed out to most cheesemongers on their first day. He sets up a market, Fairway Market in New York. And then you have Ari and Paul of Zingerman's setting up in Ann Arbor. So now, in this final movement, almost 40 years later, what have we done? I believe we've elevated cheese from something of food to back being a story of identity. People at this point want food to have context. So similar to the Renaissance we've experienced in craft beer, sourdough bread, heirloom seed varietals, and organic produce, we want more from our food. We want story, we want connection. And I believe that that's what cheese has to offer now. You have cheesemakers like Matteo Keller of Jasper Hill Farms, along with his brother Andy. See, Jasper Hills is more than your average creamery. They make some cheeses. They manage 3 herd of cow, all specific breed of cow, all for a specific cheese. And then they also have the cave. Now, the cave at Jasper Hills has been built directly into the Vermont landscape, blasted into their farm. And they age cheeses that they make themselves, as well as cheeses from other creameries. What Andy and Matteo have done is create a pipeline for small creameries that wouldn't have necessarily been able to get to market to be able to sell their cheese more easily. Families like the Von Trapp family creamery, who many years later, after escaping Nazis, have come and moved to northern Vermont to make cheese. They make a cheese called Oma, which means grandmother, and is very similar to the wash rind cheeses of the Bavarian hills that once were so alive with the sound of music. My favorite cheese in the cellars is Cabot cloth-bound, and it should be the last cheese on your plate. If you miss the Vella, eat it, enjoy it. But really savor this Cabot cloth-bound. You already know a little bit about it. It's been cheddared, so notice that texture. See, Cabot was the first cheese to be a collaborator. Cabot was the first creamery to be a collaborator in the cave. Too many C's in that sentence. They, around 2005, helped form the cave, and they make cheddar using only the finest milk they have available to them for the Cabot cloth-bound. They then ship it down to Jasper Hill Cellars, who binds it in cloth and actually puts this cheese back into the Vermont landscape. So what you should get is a cheddar that tastes distinctly more than just of cheese, but of the place it actually came from. Once again, connecting a people, a culture, and a cheese. So how do you take part in this growing movement? Well, ask questions. Engage your local cheesemonger. Ask questions about the feed, the breed. They should know that. And if they approach those questions and answers with love, then you know that the food they're feeding you is also going to be approached with love. And look for cheesemongers and cheesemakers who've been certified cheese professionals by the American Cheese Society, as my pin indicates. We're here to tell you stories about cheese and once again connect you to something more than just a food, but to a people, a place, a culture. Thank you.